All right, so this is going to be my, I guess, reflective video discussion about our game dev project for my programming class. Basically, talk about what I've done, like why I've done some of the stuff I've done, and yeah. So at this point, this is our first playable. So we've gone through prototype and the first playable tasks. And so for the first playable, for the prototype, actually, I had worked on our player controller, uh, the sort of menu system, UI, the attack mining system, ore deposit depletion, and the game state triggers, so that you could, go through each of the states and have them actually change. And then for the first playable, I implemented a bunch of particles. If I can find this. Yes, I set up our volume sliders, set up functionality between menus, and set up our timer so that it would work again when you paused and resumed, as well as like I said, got a couple different particles implemented into the game so that they show up while you're walking or mining. The Yeah, it's kind of like a basic of like the different tasks I've done. I'm the game designer for our game, which means basically I'm kind of deciding whether the game is fun or not, so mechanic wise and stuff like that. A lot of that is on me to decide whether it fits well enough in the game and whether it's something that we want to keep working with. So a lot of my tasks are a little smaller as of right now. They may get bigger as we go forwards, but yeah. Let's see. I guess talk about a couple decisions I've done. So I guess first one would just be our player controller. I started setting it up with Unity's new input system, as it's just something I've been more comfortable using. It's something I know how to use. However, we did end up having to refactor that, as once we started bringing stuff together, we found out that it didn't quite work with the multiplayer goal that we were working with, as we needed a player input component, which the script that I had set up for the player controller was not made to interact with that. So Silver, our lead programmer, and I worked together to refactor that and have it so that it would work, and hop into the game and have multiplayer working, have multiple people moving around. All that is in there now. And that was something that I haven't actually used before. I don't think I've ever looked at the player input. I've always just used the normal input system. So trying to figure that out was interesting to learn for me. For example, some programming patterns. Basically, I tried to follow OOP as best as I could. Don't throw everything into one spot. Don't make God classes, sort of that thing. And yeah, a little hard to figure out how to word some of this stuff. But let's see. I guess I can go back to describing some work. So another system that I had created was the attack/mining system, which basically worked the same for both, where you would hit a button, whether it's F or the A key on a controller, and you would attack forwards a set range. And if you detected either a player or a rock tagged as ore in front of you, you would hit it. And for players, it would stun them. If it was ore, it would destroy that object, and you would gain that ore into your inventory. And then the deposit system was another thing that I made, which was just a very simple script. When the player controller walks into the collider, your score, the ore that you have starts to go down as you put it into the box, and then your actual game score updates. As the whole goal of the game is to get as much ore into these deposit boxes as you can and end up with more than everyone else. And so that was set up my way. Let's see. During our second sprint, which was first playable, I worked with our volume slider, getting those set up, which was relatively simple. I was able to set up a master control for each of the audio sources and then drag them in. And then we also set up a master slider as well, which when moved would affect both music and the sound effects. That one took a little bit to figure out as it wasn't as simple as just dragging an audio source in. We had to set code up to get it to work. Let's see. Another thing that I worked with was basically the particles. So the artists were the ones that created the particle effects, but I was the one that implemented them into the game. But this was my first time working with particles, as I don't believe I've ever actually touched them before. We've never needed to do it for any other assignments. So it was interesting looking through that and trying to figure out, we already have it here, but how do I connect it to our player? How do I connect it to the ore, We had 3 different particle effects for the 3 different colored ores, so when you would break the ore, that particle effect would appear. We had one for when the player was walking, which ended up, I believe, it was a dust trail that would fly out behind them. And it took a little bit to figure it out, as, again, I've never worked with particles before. But my basic thing was, for the player, we basically exposed the variable so we could drag the walking particles into it, and then whenever the player's moving, those particles play, and then when they stop, the particles stop as well. And it's the same thing with the ore. When you mine the ore and it goes to disappear before it breaks, we play the effect, and then it disappears. Let's see. The timer was another thing that I had to work on, which I struggled a decent bit with as we could not figure out what was going on. The way we have our game set up is that we have a main, our normal canvas, and then each of the players have their own canvas to set up the timer, so everyone has their own. So again, this was another task that I worked alongside our lead programmer, Silva, to try and figure out. And by the end of it, I think we both felt a little silly since the answer that we got working was very simple. Basically, when we went to call the timer, we would enable it and enable a bunch of methods and disable them, which was where a lot of the issue was coming from. So we basically just removed the enable disable from that timer script, and then on our normal UI game state manager script, we changed our game state time so that when you're in gameplay, time is set to 1, and when you're in pause, it's set to 0, which was a very simple fix, but it worked and it did what we needed it to do. Which, after looking at it for a while, made us feel kind of stupid, but it did work. Another thing that I had to do, which doesn't quite relate to the code, it was more, since I'm the game developer, I have to work on our GDD. So I had to fill it out, get all the sections updated. So we would do, have a basic overview page, page pertaining to our art design, the sounds, what's going on with that, our gameplay mechanics, game loop, core, stuff like that, as well as we had to do a competitive analysis for it, which our main kind of inspirations for this game are Binding of Isaac, Repo, and Deep Rock Galactic, which is kind of where our game stems from. And we did so we had our comparisons to those. And let's see. I think as of right now, that's the majority of what I've done. A lot of my stuff has kind of ended up being refactored, so it works. But yeah, I don't really have that much more that I haven't touched on. So I suppose that's really the end of my discussion here. think going forwards, I do have more tasks. Like I know in our next sprint here, I will be working on improving our gameplay score functionality, improving the deposit box to maybe make it a little quicker. We'll be updating UI and that. So as of right now, we still have placeholders in, so I'll be making sure those are up to date. Make sure everything looks fine, fits with our art style. And I'll be looking at getting our player animation manager set up, as right now our players T-pose while they're walking around instead of actually moving. So once we get that set up, we'll be able to have the animations actually show. But other than that, that is my sort of reflective discussion about my programming tasks.